Your daughter is alive. She is suffering. At her hands. Merlin the raven's torn cry echoed like thunder through the vast, cold mansion, tearing at Victor's chest. The millionaire, paralyzed, felt the ground vanish beneath his feet as the image of little Clara, whom he believed he had lost forever, trembled before his eyes, blurred by a long, dormant pain. His heart, mourning for years, exploded in a brutal mix of hope and terror, fury rising like molten lava in his veins. He ran, despair fueling every step, to confront the woman he had sworn to love. But what he was about to discover about his wife's darkest secrets would shatter his world into pieces and reveal an abyss of unimaginable cruelty. Victor burst into the main hall, the echo of his footsteps resounding like drum beats in his chest. Sophia was there, sitting with cold elegance by the fireplace, flipping through an art magazine, the picture of serenity. Seeing him, she raised a delicate eyebrow, a faint smile on her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "Victor, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. But to Victor, it sounded like ice, sharp and cold. He stopped a few feet from her, hands clenched into fists, trembling visibly. "Clara," Merlin said. "He said Clara is alive, Sophia, that she is suffering at your hands." Victor's voice broke, choked by a brutal mix of insane hope and paralyzing terror. He watched her, every fiber of his being pleading for a denial, for a laugh that would belie the madness of his words, that would dispel that newly awakened nightmare. Sophia, however, showed no surprise. Only a tired sigh escaped her perfectly sculpted lips. "Victor, my love, the pain of grief is consuming you overwhelmingly. You're listening to the delusions of a bird. Clara is gone, my dear. We need to accept this harsh reality." She rose, approaching with slow, measured steps, extending a hand to touch his face with false compassion. "You need to rest, Victor. Your mind is playing tricks on you." But Victor recoiled abruptly, repulsion burning on his skin like fire. "No, it's not a delusion. Merlin, he never makes mistakes, Sophia." His eyes swept the hall, searching for the raven, which hovered silently above, observing the scene with almost human intelligence, its black eyes fixed on them. Merlin, as if understanding the urgency of the moment, descended gracefully, landing on Victor's shoulder. With his sharp beak, he pulled a small piece of blue satin ribbon that was caught on Victor's collar, a ribbon Clara loved to wear in her hair, a small detail Victor cherished like a precious relic. Merlin dropped the ribbon to the floor, and with a low caw, a sound that seemed to carry a message, flew towards one of the mansion's oldest doors, a rarely used door that led to a forgotten, dusty service wing. Victor's heart gave a violent leap in his chest. That ribbon, it was such an intimate and personal symbol of Clara. And Merlin's behavior, so deliberate, so focused, couldn't be a coincidence. It wasn't a delusion. It was a guide, a light in the darkness. Sophia watched the scene with an expression that wavered between poorly disguised irritation and a pale veneer of forced concern. "Victor, don't be ridiculous. It's just a bird. He's playing with you." Her voice was now firmer, a veiled and authoritative tone of command. But Victor no longer heard her. His eyes were fixed on the old door and then on Merlin, who awaited him, bobbing his head as if impatiently urging him on. The fury that was once blind now transformed into a cold, cutting determination, sharper than any blade. The image of Clara, perhaps alive, perhaps suffering somewhere in that house, was a fire that propelled him with unshakable force. He could no longer afford to doubt, not for a second. With a look of helplessness and betrayal at Sophia, who remained motionless, arms crossed, Victor turned and ran, following the raven with desperate urgency, hope and fear intertwined in every beat of his tormented heart. The truth, he felt with every fiber of his being, lay behind that dusty door, and he would uncover it, no matter the cost, for his daughter. Victor ran, his heart beating erratically, a drum of hope and dread in his chest. The old, heavy, forgotten door creaked under his hurried touch, revealing a dark, damp corridor, permeated with the smell of mold and abandonment. Merlin flew ahead, his black wings cutting through the heavy air, a beacon in the darkness. Victor could barely see, but the urgency in his steps was undeniable. He stumbled over unidentified objects, ignoring the pain, his mind fixed only on Clara. Behind him, he heard Sophia's hurried footsteps, her voice now tinged with an exasperation Victor had never witnessed. "Victor, stop this madness. There's nothing here. You'll hurt yourself." Her tone was a strange mix of plea and command, and Victor realized with a chilling shiver that the control she had always exerted was unraveling. He ignored Sophia, his eyes fixed on Merlin's silhouette, hovering near a wall covered by a faded tapestry. The faint light filtering from a high crack barely reached that corner of the corridor. Victor approached, his breath heavy, the icy air cutting into his lungs. The tapestry, once vibrant, was now just a tangle of faded threads, covering what appeared to be a protrusion in the wall. Merlin cawed softly, landing at Victor's shoulder, and with his beak pulled a loose thread from the tapestry, revealing a small crack in the masonry. It wasn't a solid wall. There was a door there, cruelly camouflaged with mastery. Victor felt a knot form in his throat, the truth beginning to solidify in his mind with terrifying clarity. He pulled the tapestry away forcefully, revealing a dark wooden door, almost invisible in the gloom, with no apparent handle. It was a secret passage, hidden in plain sight, perhaps for decades. His hands trembled as he fumbled over the cold surface, searching for a mechanism, a latch, anything that could open that portal to the unknown. Sophia reached him, her voice now a hoarse, desperate whisper. "Victor, please, don't do this. You don't know what you're doing." Her eyes, once cold and calculating, now gleamed with genuine fear, a layer of panic she could no longer hide. But Sophia's plea only fueled Victor's determination. He felt the betrayal in her every word, in her every gesture. Merlin, as if sensing Victor's frustration, flew to a small stone gargoyle embedded in the wall above the door. With a precise movement of his beak, he pushed one of the gargoyle's eyes. A soft, almost inaudible click echoed in the heavy silence of the corridor. The door creaked slightly, revealing a dark crack. Victor's heart pounded. He pushed the door carefully, and it opened slowly, revealing not a room, but a steep staircase descending into darkness, the air even heavier and colder, laden with an oppressive silence that seemed to scream secrets. Victor looked at Sophia, his eyes burning with a silent fury, a pain so deep it seemed to tear his soul to pieces. Her mask of compassion had fallen completely, revealing the cold, calculating woman he had never known existed. "Clara, she's here, isn't she?" His voice was a thread, barely audible, but laden with overwhelming certainty. Sophia recoiled a step, her face pale, her lips trembling. She said nothing, but her silence was a confession louder than any scream. Victor felt the world spin, his wife's betrayal a more devastating blow than Clara's loss itself. He descended the first step, Merlin on his shoulder, the darkness of the staircase swallowing him, but the light of hope, fragile and stubborn, guided his steps towards the daughter he believed he had lost forever. The descent was torturous. Each creak of the old wooden step beneath his feet echoed like a lament in the dense darkness, which seemed to swallow any trace of light. The air was heavy, damp, and cold, laden with the unmistakable scent of abandonment and despair. Victor fumbled along the rough wall, feeling the dampness and mold, while Merlin on his shoulder remained strangely silent, only his black eyes gleaming in the gloom, a vigilant guide. With each step, the image of Clara, the daughter he had mourned for years, rose in his mind, no longer a distant memory, but a palpable presence. Perhaps so close he could almost feel her warmth. Victor's heart pounded, an erratic rhythm of dread and an almost insane hope. Upstairs, he could hear Sophia's hurried footsteps, which seemed to hesitate at the top of the staircase. "Victor, come back! This is madness! You'll regret it!" Her voice, once controlled and cold, was now tinged with disordered panic. A sound Victor never thought he would hear. But he didn't stop. Her betrayal, the lie that had poisoned his life for so long, was an unbridgeable chasm between them. He felt the pain of disappointment, but the urgency of finding Clara was a fire that consumed everything. The staircase seemed endless, spiraling down into the depths of the mansion, a place Victor had never imagined existed. Finally, his feet touched a cold stone floor. The darkness was still almost total, but Merlin took flight, making a small circle and landing on a low shelf, which Victor only noticed existed when he felt the raven's touch. With his beak, Merlin pushed an object. A soft metallic sound echoed, and a small, hidden, dusty oil lamp swung, igniting with a weak, flickering flame, revealing a narrow corridor. The corridor was even colder and more oppressive, the stone walls bare and damp. Victor advanced, the light of the small lamp flickering in his trembling hands, revealing rudimentary childish drawings scrawled on the walls. They were stick figures, colored with faded chalk, a girl with long hair, a tall man, a bird. Victor's heart tightened. They were Clara's drawings. He recognized the style, the innocence of those lines. His daughter was there. She was indeed alive. A new wave of fury and despair swept over him. How could Sophia have done this? How could he have been so blind? The pain of grief he carried was a farce, a smokescreen to hide unimaginable cruelty. He touched the drawings with his fingertips, feeling the rough texture of the stone, the innocence of the images. His eyes welled up, but he blinked, refusing to give in to emotion before finding his daughter. Merlin cawed softly, drawing his attention to the end of the corridor. There was a door there, small and wooden, different from the others, with a small gap at the bottom. Victor approached, the sound of his own breathing echoing loudly in his ears. He knelt, his eyes fixed on the gap. A soft scent of lavender, an aroma he associated with Clara, wafted through the air. And then a sound, a low murmur, almost a sigh, followed by a small sob. It was a child's voice. Victor felt an electric shock run through his body. It was Clara. She was there, on the other side of that door, his eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming joy, mixed with a cold, cutting anger towards Sophia. He stood, hands clenched into fists, the determination in his eyes stronger than ever. Justice would be served, and his daughter would be free. He reached for the cold doorknob, his heart beating like a war drum, ready to uncover what lay behind that door and confront the darkness that had imprisoned his most precious light. Victor reached for the cold doorknob, his heart beating like a war drum, ready to uncover what lay behind that door and confront the darkness that had imprisoned his most precious light. With a hesitant push, the wood creaked, revealing a small dark room, lit only by a single kerosene lamp in the corner, which flickered with a weak yellowish light. The air was dense, laden with the same smell of mold and lavender. His eyes, adjusting to the gloom, focused on the center of the room. There, huddled on a simple iron bed, covered by a faded blanket, was a tiny figure, a girl. Her blonde hair, once so bright and full of life, was dull and matted. Her face, once rosy and cheerful, was pale and thin. Her blue eyes, once full of curiosity, now carried a shadow of fear and loneliness. It was Clara, the Clara he had mourned for years, the Clara he believed he had lost forever. A muffled cry escaped Victor's throat, a mix of overwhelming relief and a searing pain that tore at his chest. He fell to his knees on the doorstep, his hands trembling uncontrollably, tears streaming freely down his face. "Clara, my daughter." His voice was a hoarse whisper, almost inaudible, choked with emotion. The girl, startled by the noise and the imposing figure in the doorway, shrank further under the blanket, her eyes wide with terror. She didn't recognize him immediately. Years of isolation had erased her memories, or perhaps the pain was so great it kept her in a state of denial. Merlin, who had entered silently, landed on the doorframe, observing the scene with an almost human seriousness. With a soft caw, he flew to the bed, landing delicately on the edge near Clara's small hand. The girl, surprised but not frightened by the raven, extended a trembling finger and touched Merlin's black feathers. A small, fragile, uncertain smile appeared on her lips. Victor, seeing the interaction, felt a pang of hope. Merlin was the bridge. He rose slowly, trying not to scare her, extending a hand to her, his heart in tatters. "Clara, it's me, Daddy. Do you remember, Daddy?" He approached with slow, careful steps, each movement laden with infinite tenderness. Clara's eyes fixed on him, searching for something familiar in those features marked by pain and time. Slowly, a light of recognition ignited in them. A solitary tear rolled down her pale face. "Daddy?" Her voice was a thread, almost a breath, but to Victor, it was the most beautiful melody he had ever heard. He knelt beside the bed, eyes welling up, extending his arms. "Yes, my love, it's Daddy. I've come to get you." He embraced her with a delicacy that contrasted with the strength of his pain, feeling his daughter's tiny, fragile body in his arms. The smell of lavender and mold mingled with her scent, a bittersweet aroma of reunion. Clara, initially rigid, relaxed in his arms, clinging to him with surprising strength, silent tears wetting Victor's shoulder. Upstairs, at the top of the staircase, Sophia watched the scene paralyzed. Her eyes, once filled with panic, now reflected a cold and inevitable defeat. The truth had been unveiled, and her world of lies crumbled before her eyes. But Victor didn't care about her now. His world was reduced to Clara, to that tight embrace, to the silent promise that he would never leave her again. Justice would come, but at that moment, the only thing that mattered was the restored connection, the warmth of his daughter in his arms, a miracle brought by the loyalty of a raven. Victor held Clara tightly against him, feeling her small body tremble in his arms. The scent of lavender, once a bittersweet reminder, now mingled with the smell of mold and tears, becoming the aroma of his redemption. He kissed his daughter's matted hair, feeling its rough texture, but her warmth was proof that it wasn't a dream. Guilt crushed him, a silent pain for not having noticed, for having believed Sophia's charade. But alongside the guilt, a cold and unshakable fury grew, a silent promise that no one would ever harm his Clara again. Clara, still fragile and frightened, clung to her father with surprising strength for her size. Her sobs, once contained, now turned into silent weeping, an outpouring of years of loneliness and fear. Merlin, the astute raven, watched the scene from the doorframe, his black eyes fixed on them, like a silent guardian who had finally fulfilled his mission. He knew that light had returned to that dark place. Victor pulled back slightly, holding Clara's pale face between his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "It's all right now, my love. Daddy is here. You are safe." His voice was hoarse with emotion, but firm, full of an unbreakable promise. Clara looked at him with her big blue eyes, still tear-filled, but a small ray of hope began to shine in them. Upstairs, at the top of the staircase, Sophia descended one step, then another. Her face was pale, her mask of coldness shattered, revealing a cornered woman. "Victor, just please, let's talk. There's an explanation for all of this." Her voice was a desperate murmur, a last pathetic plea. Victor raised his eyes and stared at her, the fury in his gaze sharper than any words. He didn't need explanations. The image of Clara, thin and frightened, was the only explanation that mattered. "There's nothing to talk about, Sophia," he said, his voice low, but laden with an authority she had never heard before. You stole years of our daughter's life. You stole my chance to be a father. There is no forgiveness for that." He stood, Clara still in his arms, and turned to the bedroom door. The faint light of the kerosene lamp illuminated the room, revealing the cruel simplicity of the captivity. Victor felt a tightening in his chest. He needed to get her out of there immediately. "Let's go, my love," he whispered to Clara, who nestled her head on his shoulder. With Clara in his arms, Victor ascended the steep staircase, each step an act of liberation. Sophia stood at the top, blocking the way. Her eyes pleaded, but Victor no longer saw the woman he had loved. He saw only the traitor, his daughter's tormentor. "Get out of my way, Sophia," he ordered, his voice icy. She hesitated, but Victor's gaze, so full of pain and repulsion, made her step back. He walked past her without even a sideways glance, his mind focused only on Clara. Merlin flew ahead, clearing a path through the dark corridor, as if still guiding them towards the light. As they reached the mansion's main corridor, the daylight streaming through the windows seemed to dazzle Clara, who blinked, adjusting to the brightness. Victor held her tighter. He knew the healing journey would be long, but the first and most important part was done. Clara was free. Victor stopped, turning to Sophia, who had followed in silence, her expression of defeat now mixed with a hint of despair. "You will be held accountable for every day of suffering you caused," he declared, his voice resonating with the strength of a father who had recovered his reason for living. "Justice will prevail, Sophia, and Clara will get back everything you took from her." He didn't wait for a response. With a final look of helplessness and determination, Victor walked away, taking his daughter out of that place of darkness, towards a future of hope and love, while Merlin, perched on the doorframe, watched the scene, a silent witness to the truth he had revealed. Victor left the mansion, the morning sun kissing Clara's pale face, which flinched slightly at the intensity of the light. He held her tighter against his chest, feeling the warmth of her body, the faint beat of her tiny heart. That moment was a miracle, a rebirth. Sophia, somewhere behind them, would be confronted by justice, but now the only justice that mattered was the restoration of his daughter's life. Nurses and doctors, called by Victor in a frenzy of relief and urgency, were already waiting. Gently, Clara was examined. Her body was fragile, malnourished, and her eyes carried a deep sadness that broke Victor's heart. He watched every movement, every touch, with palpable anxiety, his hands clenched, his breath caught in his throat, fearing every diagnosis, yet hopeful for every sign of improvement. Merlin, the faithful raven, flew to the windowsill of the room where Clara was being cared for, watching her with protective stillness, as if still looking after his little friend. The days that followed were a bittersweet mix of relief and challenges. Clara needed time, love, patience. She barely spoke, her lips forming only inaudible whispers, and her eyes, though less frightened, still avoided direct contact with Victor. It was as if an invisible barrier separated her from the world, a cruel consequence of her long isolation. Victor dedicated every minute to her, reading stories, singing forgotten songs, trying to rekindle the flame of joy that had once defined her. He took her for short walks in the garden, hoping nature would bring some solace, but she remained distant, her small gestures of affection rare and fleeting, like shy butterflies. Until one sunny afternoon, as Victor read her a fairy tale book, Merlin landed on the windowsill, cawing softly. Clara, who had been motionless until then, turned her head. Her eyes, once vacant, fixed on the raven with surprising intensity. A small smile, the first genuine smile Victor had seen on her since the rescue, lit up her pale face. She extended her tiny hand, and Merlin approached, allowing her to touch his black feathers with childish delicacy. Victor felt a pang in his chest, a mix of gratitude and a strange melancholy. The raven, who had saved her, seemed to be the only one she fully trusted. The turning point came unexpectedly, revealing the depth of Clara's connection with the animal. Victor tried, for the umpteenth time, to talk to Clara about her day, about what she would like to eat, when she, without taking her eyes off Merlin, who was perched on her shoulder, murmured something. Victor leaned in, barely able to hear the words. "Merlin, he understands me," she said, her voice a thread, but it was the longest and clearest sentence she had uttered. Victor felt a shiver run down his spine. It wasn't just a smile. It was a deep, almost mystical connection that defied understanding. Clara seemed to communicate with the raven in a way no one else understood. She whispered to Merlin, sharing secrets that only the bird seemed to decipher, and the raven responded with soft caws as if they were in a private dialogue. This revelation, that Clara had developed such a singular and exclusive bond with the raven, was at once a relief and a new, complex challenge for Victor. How could he fully reconnect with his daughter if the bridge between them was a bird, her silent savior? The hope for Clara's quick and complete recovery, which Victor so longed for, now proved more intricate than he had imagined, demanding even greater understanding and patience from him. Victor watched his daughter and the raven, a complex mix of deep gratitude and a pang of melancholy in his chest. It was Merlin, the astute raven, who seemed to hold the key to Clara's world, who could coax from her small smiles and rare murmurs. Victor sometimes felt like a stranger in his own daughter's life, a spectator to a connection that defied his understanding. The vast mansion, once a home of silent mourning and echoing walls, now resonated with Victor's tireless attempts to fill the void, with the stories he read softly and the forgotten lullabies he murmured. But invariably, Clara's response was always more vivid, more genuine, when Merlin was nearby, on her shoulder or on the windowsill. He spent long hours in her room, sitting in an old armchair, just watching, his heart heavy. Clara, with her blue eyes still laden with shadows and deep sadness, often turned to the raven, who landed delicately. She whispered words inaudible to Victor, and Merlin tilted his head, as if absorbing every secret, every pain, every hope of the little girl. Victor felt an invisible barrier, a glass wall that separated him from the intimacy and understanding Clara shared with the bird. It was a silent pain, an emotional obstacle he hadn't expected, but he knew with bitter certainty that he needed to be patient. Clara's recovery would not be a straight and simple path, but a journey full of twists and challenges. One day, as Victor tried with the utmost tenderness to persuade Clara to eat a little more homemade soup, she pushed the spoon away with her fragile little hand, her lips pressed together in silent refusal. Merlin, who was perched on the headboard of the bed, cawed softly, a sound that seemed to carry a message. Clara looked at the raven, her eyes fixed on him, and then, to Victor's surprise and relief, she picked up the spoon again and brought it to her mouth, swallowing the food. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible to a casual observer, but to Victor it was a clear and powerful sign. Merlin was not just a friend, he was an interpreter, a catalyst for his daughter's wounded soul. Victor, with a new understanding, began to use Merlin as a delicate bridge. He spoke to the raven as if transmitting an important message to Clara through him. "Merlin, tell Clara that Daddy made a beautiful drawing for her," he would say, showing a colorful scribble of a smiling sun and a vibrant flower. Clara watched the interaction, her blue eyes moving between her father and the bird, and slowly her gaze began to linger more on Victor. Gradually, the glass barrier, so solid before, began to crack, revealing glimpses of hope. Still, Clara's fragility was evident in every fiber of her being. She had frequent nightmares, waking with a muffled scream, her eyes wide with terror that seemed to relive the shadows of captivity. On those nights, Victor held her tightly, rocking her gently, murmuring words of comfort. But it was Merlin who, landing on her chest with a soft, familiar caw, seemed to calm her more deeply, bringing her a solace Victor could not yet offer alone. The raven was Clara's anchor in a world that still frightened and confused her. Victor realized he needed to delve into and understand Clara's world, the particular universe she had built in her long and painful isolation, where Merlin was her closest confidant and constant protector. He began to research, with the same dedication as his technological projects, about the intelligence of ravens, about communication between humans and animals, seeking any clue, any fragment of knowledge that could help him get closer to his daughter. It was a new and unexpected path for a tech magnate, but he was willing to walk every inch, to learn every lesson for Clara. One afternoon, as Victor read Clara a fairy tale book, Merlin began to gently peck at the page of an illustrated book, drawing the girl's attention. Clara laughed, a fragile but undeniably joyful sound that filled the room with a long-forgotten melody. Victor looked up, seeing the genuine smile blossom on his daughter's face. In that moment, he understood it wasn't a matter of replacing Merlin, of competing for her affection, but of integrating the raven, of accepting that Clara's healing would inevitably pass through this unique and precious connection. He extended his hand to Clara, and she, for the first time without Merlin's mediation, held it with her tiny fingers. A thread of hope, stronger and more real than ever, united the three of them in that instant. That small touch, the warmth of Clara's tiny fingers in his, was like a ray of sunshine breaking through the densest clouds for Victor. He gently squeezed her little hand, feeling a wave of emotion that almost made him cry again. It wasn't a complete cure, he knew, but it was a beginning, a sign that the invisible barrier between them was starting to yield. Merlin, perched on the windowsill, watched the scene with his intelligent black eyes, as if approving of the new connection. The days that followed were woven with threads of patience and unconditional love. Victor transformed the mansion, once a mausoleum of his own pain, into a sanctuary of recovery for Clara. He filled her room with colorful books, soft toys, and drawings he made himself, trying to recreate the childhood that had been stolen from her. Clara, though still fragile and silent, began to show small signs of opening up. She allowed Victor to comb her hair, her blonde locks, once matted, now soft and shiny. Occasionally, a small, almost imperceptible smile would appear on her lips when he read a funny story, especially if Merlin was nearby, cawing at strategic moments, as if participating in the narrative. Victor still felt guilt tighten his chest, a constant shadow for not having noticed his daughter's suffering. But this guilt was now a driving force, pushing him to be the father Clara deserved. He sat for hours beside her, simply existing in her space, not demanding conversations, just offering his presence and his love. He learned to decipher Clara's small gestures, the slight nod to indicate she liked a fruit flavor, the firmer squeeze of his hand when she felt safe, the fixed gaze on Merlin when she needed extra comfort. Merlin was, without a doubt, the strongest link. He became Clara's silent confidant, the winged guardian who understood her wordless language. Victor realized that to get closer to Clara, he needed to accept and even embrace this unique connection. He began to interact more with Merlin, asking the raven to tell Clara about the day's plans, or to ask her what she would like to do. It was a delicate dance, a ballet of indirect communication that little by little brought Clara closer to both of them. One afternoon, as Victor and Clara were in the garden, watching butterflies, Merlin flew and landed gently on Clara's head, who let out a little giggle. It was a sound so pure, so full of life, that Victor felt his eyes well up. He extended his hand to Clara, and she, without hesitation, held it. This time she not only held it, but squeezed it, and her blue eyes, once so full of fear, met his with a spark of recognition and affection. "Daddy, the butterflies are beautiful," she whispered, her words clearer and more audible than ever. Victor felt his heart overflow. It wasn't just a sentence, it was a bridge, a melody he had waited years to hear. He embraced her tenderly, feeling her tiny body relax in his arms. The recovery would be long, full of challenges and setbacks, but in that instant, under the gentle sun, with Merlin watching from high in a tree, Victor knew that the family was rebuilding, one small step at a time, driven by the strength of love and the unexpected wisdom of a raven. The gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine, mingling with the sweet aroma of the garden flowers. Clara, now more at ease, explored the flower beds with renewed curiosity, her tiny fingers pointing to the vibrant colors of the petunias. Victor watched her, his heart lighter than ever before, her every small gesture a balm for his wounded soul. She was still fragile, her movements delicate, but there was a new light in her blue eyes, a sparkle of life he thought he had lost forever. Merlin, as always, followed her closely, landing now on her shoulder, now on a nearby branch, a silent guardian who seemed to celebrate the girl's every small victory. Victor knelt beside her, showing her a ladybug that was crawling on a leaf. "Look, my love, she's so small but so strong." Clara watched the ladybug with fascination, and a genuine smile spread across her face. "Daddy, she has red wings," she whispered, her voice still soft, but with a clarity that filled Victor with hope. He felt a silent tear roll down his face, not of sadness, but of pure, deep joy. It was a miracle to watch his daughter blossom again. Days turned into weeks, and each day brought a new step in Clara's journey. She began to eat with more appetite, to sleep without the nightmares that haunted her, and most importantly, to interact more directly with Victor. Conversations once mediated by Merlin now flowed more naturally between father and daughter. Victor read to her every night, fairy tales and adventure stories, and Clara, nestled in his arms, listened attentively, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just smiling. The mansion, once a place of oppressive silence, now echoed with the soft sounds of childhood, Clara's laughter, the murmur of her words, Merlin's occasional caw. Victor had transformed one of the grand halls into a play space with colorful cushions, colored pencils and sheets of paper. Clara spent hours drawing, and her drawings, once dark and abstract, began to take recognizable forms: flowers, butterflies, and, invariably, a raven with open wings, as if the bird were an intrinsic part of her inner world. One afternoon, as Victor and Clara drew together, she picked up a blue pencil and began to sketch a portrait. With intense concentration, she drew a man with dark hair and kind eyes. Victor watched, his heart pounding. When she finished, she pointed to the drawing with a shy smile. "It's you, Daddy," she said, and then with a gesture that melted Victor's heart, she leaned in and kissed his cheek. It was the first spontaneous kiss, a tangible proof of the love that was being reborn between them. Victor hugged her tightly, feeling little Clara relax in his arms. "I love you so much, my love," he whispered, his voice choked. Merlin, perched on the window, watched the scene, his black eyes reflecting the light of the setting sun. He had done his part. The family was healing, an unbreakable bond of love forming. The raven was still a comfort to Clara, a reminder of his loyalty, but Victor felt the bridge between him and his daughter solid, built on love and patience. Challenges existed. Fears and shadows of the past clouded Clara's eyes. Victor was there, firm, ready to chase away every shadow. Healing was a continuous journey, and he would walk beside her. That hug, that kiss, were the promise of a future where Clara's innocence would be protected and her heart, finally, free to love and dream. The promise of a future, sealed in that hug and kiss, was the new foundation of Victor's life. Each dawn brought the delicate task of nurturing hope and rebuilding Clara's world. The mansion, once a refuge of mourning, was now a sanctuary of small miracles. Victor watched his daughter attentively, noticing every nuance in her expression, every tremor, every sparkle in her blue eyes, losing the shadows of the past. Clara, more communicative, still carried the scars of isolation. There were days when silence became her refuge again, and her eyes would wander, reliving terrifying moments. Victor didn't force her. He simply sat beside her, holding her tiny hand with tenderness, offering his presence. Merlin, the faithful raven, sensed these changes. He would land on Clara's shoulder, cawing softly, and the girl, as if awakening, would reconnect, a fragile smile appearing on her lips. Victor understood that healing was not linear, but a winding path with advances and retreats. He dedicated himself to creating an environment of safety and love where Clara could be a child. They spent hours in the garden, exploring nature, observing birds and flowers. Victor read her fairy tales, books about animals and the vast world, filling in the gaps in her knowledge. Clara, with her curiosity, absorbed everything, her questions becoming more frequent. One of the biggest challenges was Clara's reintroduction to the outside world. Leaving the mansion, even for a short walk, triggered anxiety. Her eyes would widen with terror, and she would cling to Victor tightly, her tiny body trembling. Victor, with patience and a calm voice, explained that he would protect her. He started with small steps, a car ride around the estate, a brief visit to an isolated park. Each outing was a test, but also a victory. Clara, with Merlin nearby, trusted her father's safety. The connection with Merlin remained a fundamental pillar. The raven was not just a pet, he was a family member, a silent confidant, a winged therapist who understood Clara's soul. Victor realized that instead of diminishing this bond, he should strengthen it, for it was through it that Clara found part of her inner strength. He spoke to Merlin, asked the bird for advice, like a wise elder, and Clara watched the interaction, her eyes shining with an understanding that only she and the raven seemed to share. One afternoon, in the garden, as Victor and Clara read, a group of neighborhood children approached the wall. Clara shrank behind Victor, her eyes fixed on them with fear and fascination. Victor felt concern. How could he help her reconnect, make friends, live a normal childhood? It was a gigantic social obstacle. Merlin, sensing the tension, flew and landed on Clara's shoulder, cawing softly, a sound of encouragement. The girl looked at the raven and then, with a hesitant gesture, peeked from behind Victor, waving shyly. It wasn't a big breakthrough, but a promising start. Victor smiled at his daughter, full of pride and overflowing love. He knew the journey would be long, full of challenges. But every small step Clara took was a testament to her resilience and the unbreakable strength of the love that united them. He was there, firm, for every fear, every smile, every new challenge. The family was healing, and Victor, with Clara in his arms and Merlin on his shoulder, was ready for the future. The family was healing, and Victor, with Clara in his arms and Merlin on his shoulder, was ready for the future. The days that followed were dedicated to strengthening that promise. Victor, with the patience of a craftsman, continued to weave the web of safety and love around Clara. He knew that the journey to full recovery included the challenge of reintroducing her to the world, but the fear of overwhelming her was constant. However, the small wave to the neighborhood children had planted a seed of hope. Victor began to plan carefully. He spoke with the parents of the children who lived next door, explaining Clara's delicate situation, asking for understanding and discretion. They arranged an informal gathering, an afternoon of tea and cookies in the mansion's vast garden, a familiar and safe environment for Clara. The idea was for the children to play nearby, without pressure, allowing Clara to approach in her own time. On the appointed day, the sun shone softly, and Victor felt a mix of anxiety and hope. Clara was sitting on a stone bench near a rose bed, with Merlin perched on her shoulder. She held a drawing book, but her blue eyes, once fixed on the illustrations, now drifted towards the garden gate. The neighborhood children, 2 girls and a boy, entered shyly, accompanied by their parents. Victor greeted them with a warm smile, directing them to an area with prepared toys and snacks. Clara flinched slightly, clutching the book tighter. Victor knelt beside her, holding her tiny hand. "It's all right, my love. They just want to play," he whispered, stroking her hair. Merlin cawed softly, and Clara looked at the raven, then at the children who, at a respectful distance, began to laugh and play with a ball. The minutes dragged on. Victor felt his heart tighten, fearing Clara would withdraw again. The children, noticing her quietness, slowed down, casting curious glances. One of the girls with red hair and bright eyes approached a little closer, holding a doll. She stopped a few feet from Clara, offering a small smile. "Hello," she said, her voice soft. Clara didn't respond, but her eyes didn't stray from the girl. Merlin then did something unexpected. He flew from Clara's shoulder, landing on the ground right between Clara and the red-haired girl. With a delicate beak, he picked up a small fallen flower and took it to the girl, dropping it at her feet. The red-haired girl laughed, a sweet and contagious sound. She bent down, picked up the flower, and looked at Clara. "Your bird is really cool," she said. To Victor's surprise and emotion, Clara, with an almost imperceptible tremor, let go of the book. She slid off the bench and, with hesitant steps, walked towards the girl. Her eyes, once full of apprehension, now carried a spark of curiosity and a long-dormant desire to connect. She extended her tiny hand, and the red-haired girl, understanding the gesture, placed the flower in her palm. "Thank you," Clara whispered, her words clearer and more emotional than Victor had ever heard. A genuine and radiant smile lit up her face, a smile that reached her blue eyes, erasing the last shadows of her past. Victor felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude and joy. He watched his daughter, who was finally allowing herself to be a child again, the invisible barrier completely dissolving. Merlin, from high on a branch, watched the scene with his wise black eyes, a silent guardian of a miracle unfolding before them. That moment, the exchange of a flower and a smile, was the true climax of Clara's healing, the rebirth of her innocent soul. That moment, the exchange of a flower and a smile, was the true climax of Clara's healing, the rebirth of her innocent soul. The red-haired girl, sensing the opening, extended her hand to Clara, who, without hesitation, held it. Soon the two were sitting on the grass, examining the flower, while the boy and the other girl approached, curious. Victor watched, his heart overflowing with a joy so intense it seemed almost unbearable. Tears streamed down his face, but they were tears of pure gratitude. Merlin, from high on the branch, cawed softly, as if approving the scene, his black eyes reflecting the peace that finally settled in the mansion. The days that followed were a testament to the resilience of a child's soul. The invisible barrier that surrounded Clara completely crumbled. Visits from the neighborhood children became routine, and the garden, once a silent refuge, now echoed with laughter and the sweet clamor of play. Clara, once so withdrawn, began to participate actively, her blue eyes shining with a long-lost vivacity. She ran, jumped, and even led some of the games, inventing stories and adventures with her new friends. Victor felt a profound relief, as if an immense weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The guilt that had tormented him for years for not having noticed his daughter's suffering finally began to dissipate, replaced by an unshakable certainty that he would do everything to make up for lost time. Clara's voice, once a fragile whisper, gained strength and melody. She asked questions about everything, eager to absorb the world that had been denied to her. Victor responded with infinite patience and affection, teaching her about the stars, the oceans, and the wonders of nature. He read to her every night, and Clara, nestled in his arms, no longer had nightmares. Her sleep was now peaceful and deep, a balm for her recovering soul. Merlin, the astute raven, continued to be a constant presence, but his role had changed. From guide and confidant, he became the silent guardian, observing Clara's happiness from his favorite perch. He still landed on her shoulder occasionally, but now it was more a gesture of affection than of solace. Clara, in turn, no longer needed Merlin as a bridge to the world. She had found her own voice, her own strength. Victor knew that the healing journey was continuous, but the greatest obstacles had been overcome. Clara was blossoming, and the mansion, once a place of pain and mourning, had transformed into a vibrant home, full of love and laughter. He had hired a team of professionals to help Clara in her emotional recovery, ensuring she had all the necessary support to overcome past traumas. Justice, though painful, had prevailed, and Sophia was out of their lives, a distant shadow that could no longer reach them. One afternoon, as Victor watched Clara and her friends play in the garden, he felt a peace he had never imagined possible. Clara, with a radiant smile, waved at him. Victor waved back, his eyes welling up with emotion. He knew that life would still bring challenges, but he was ready to face them, with Clara by his side. The family was rebuilt, stronger than ever, a testament to the power of unconditional love and hope that, like a wise raven, always finds its way to the light. The family was rebuilt, stronger than ever, a testament to the power of unconditional love and hope that, like a wise raven, always finds its way to the light. Days turned into months, and the mansion, once an echo of morning, now shone with the vitality of a house full of life. Clara, with her blonde hair flying in the wind and a constant smile on her lips, was the personification of joy. She not only played with the neighborhood children, but invited them to imaginary tea parties in the garden, where Merlin, the raven, often participated, perching on an empty chair like a guest of honor. Victor watched his daughter with an overflowing heart. The shadows of the past had finally dissipated. He no longer felt the pang of guilt, but rather immense gratitude for Clara's every laugh, for every curious question she asked about the world, for every tight hug she gave him at the end of the day. Clara's recovery was not just physical or social. It was a deep healing of the soul. And Victor felt that his own soul had also been mended, piece by his daughter's innocence and resilience. He had stepped back a little from business, delegating more responsibilities to dedicate his full time to Clara. Together, they explored the mansion's library, read fairy tales and science books, and Victor marveled at the girl's thirst for knowledge. Clara loved to draw, and her works, once filled with dark figures, now exploded in vibrant colors, blooming gardens, singing birds, and of course, Merlin, always present, with his wings spread in a majestic flight. Merlin, the raven, had become an inseparable member of the family. He no longer needed to guide Victor or console Clara from her fears. His role now was that of a loyal friend, a silent observer of the happiness he himself had helped build. He flew freely through the mansion and garden, but always returned to perch on Clara's shoulder or Victor's arm, a constant reminder of the extraordinary connection that united them. One afternoon, as the sun painted the sky in orange hues, Victor and Clara sat on the stone bench in the garden, the same one where she had found the courage to connect with the world again. Clara was drawing in her notebook, and Victor was reading a book to her. Merlin was perched on a nearby branch, watching them with his intelligent eyes. Clara suddenly closed her notebook and turned to her father, her blue eyes shining with a clarity and joy that warmed Victor's heart. "Daddy," she said, her voice full of melody, "I love you very much." She leaned in and kissed his cheek, a spontaneous gesture full of love. Victor hugged her tightly, feeling the little one vibrate in his arms. He knew that life with its twists and challenges would continue, but the foundation of his family was now unshakable. Justice had been served, love had prevailed, and hope, which seemed lost forever, had been restored, brighter than ever. Merlin cawed softly from the branch, as if giving his final blessing. Victor looked at the raven and then at Clara, who now smiled at him with the purity of a child who had rediscovered her place in the world. That moment, simple and profound, was the promise of a future where Clara's innocence would forever be protected, and love, the most powerful force of all, would guide their lives. The journey had been long and painful, but they had emerged from it stronger, more united, and with the certainty that, together, they could overcome anything. Light had returned to the mansion, and Victor's heart, finally, was at peace. Light had returned to the mansion, and Victor's heart, finally, was at peace. This peace was not the absence of painful memories, but rather the certainty that love had triumphed over darkness. The days unfolded with a gentle cadence, each dawn bringing new opportunities to nurture Clara's happiness and strengthen the bonds that united them. The mansion, once a silent refuge of mourning, now resonated with the melody of life. Clara's crystalline laughter echoing through the corridors, mingling with Merlin's occasional caw. Clara, now with a radiant vitality, explored the world with insatiable curiosity. Her blue eyes, once laden with apprehension, shone with precocious intelligence and contagious joy. She spent hours in the garden with her new friends, inventing magical kingdoms among the rose bushes and transforming the flower beds into stages for her imaginary adventures. Victor watched her every movement, every smile, every gesture of affection, feeling his chest swell with a gratitude that barely fit in his heart. He had allowed himself to step even further away from business, finding a greater and deeper purpose in fatherhood. Every afternoon, Victor and Clara gathered in the library, a sanctuary of stories and discoveries. He read to her about brave explorers, mythical creatures, and the mysteries of the universe. Clara, nestled in his arms, absorbed every word, her insightful questions revealing a mind eager for knowledge. Her drawings, which once reflected her torment, were now explosions of color and imagination. Winged horses, fearless princesses, and invariably a majestic raven. With open wings flying over sunny landscapes, Merlin, the raven, continued to be a constant presence, a silent and powerful link. He no longer needed to guide Victor with enigmatic clues or console Clara from her nightmares. His role had evolved into that of a loyal friend, an honored family member, whose wise black eyes watched over the happiness he himself had helped build. He would perch on Clara's shoulder as she drew, or on Victor's arm during their readings, a living reminder of the journey they had traveled. One morning, while having breakfast on the veranda, Clara, with a piece of toast in her hand, looked at Victor with unexpected seriousness. "Daddy," she began, her voice soft, "that woman, Sophia, she can't hurt us anymore, can she?" Victor felt a pang in his heart, but quickly composed himself. He leaned in, holding her tiny hand. "No, my love, never again. You are safe, and I am here forever to protect you." He saw the shadow of an old fear pass through her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by renewed confidence. Clara squeezed his hand and smiled, a smile that dispelled any lingering apprehension. The mansion, once the scene of cruel betrayal, had been purified by love and truth. Victor had transformed every room, every corner, into a space of healing and joy. He knew that Clara's scars, though invisible, would always be part of her story, but they would not define her. They would be a testament to her strength, her ability to overcome adversity and to find light even in the deepest darkness. One night, as Victor tucked her into bed, Clara hugged him with surprising strength. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered, her face nestled on his shoulder. Victor held her tightly against him, feeling the warmth and purity of that love. Merlin, from atop the bookshelf, cawed softly, as if sealing the moment with his blessing. Victor looked at his sleeping daughter, his heart overflowing. The journey had been long and arduous, but they had emerged from it stronger, more united, with the unshakable certainty that together they could face any future, guided by the love and hope that Merlin, the winged guardian, had helped rekindle.